Thelonious Monk. It's been more than 30 years since the jazz legend's death, but he still has a huge impact on the music world. His son, jazz artist Thelonious Monk III, runs his entire estate. In November, he'll head up the Thelonious Monk Institute's trumpet competition and all-star gala concert in Los Angeles. I talked to him about that event and his father's legacy. All right, it's good to have you in here.
Good to be here.
You have an all-star gala concert coming up. Tell me about that.
This is our 27th, I believe, international jazz competition for the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, which I'm the chairman of the board of trustees. Fabulous Herbie Hancock is the chairman of the board. And this year, actually, the competition is trumpet. But each year, we have simultaneous events along with the competition. We have a BMI composers competition, and generally we honor someone. Often it's a jazz personality, sometimes posthumously, as we've done for Art Blakey and Max Roach, but most often it's someone that's living, and most often it's someone that is not necessarily a jazz musician, but someone that has shown unwavering support for jazz over the years. So we've honored people like Madeleine Albright, for instance, because Madeleine Albright has been with the Monk Institute since she was Secretary of State. She's worked with us and appeared at our events and done some hosting.
And this year it's Bill Clinton?
This year it is Bubba himself. And it's so appropriate because Bill Clinton, and the reason I differentiate him from Nixon and from Jimmy Carter, though they had jazz at the White House, is because Bill Clinton was the first one to say, this is a national treasure of America. This is America's music. And as a matter of fact, the first event that President Clinton had at the White House was the 40th anniversary of the Newport Jazz Festival, and we had that on the White House lawn in 1993, and it was fabulous. We had an array of artists, many of whom are no longer here. That was fabulous. I'm talking about people like Joe Williams and Red Rodney and Dorothy Donegan.
Okay.
You know, so Bill Clinton is very important to the Monk Institute. But more importantly than that, Bill Clinton is as important a president to jazz that we've ever had. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay, and you have some younger people as well. Alicia Keys is participating.
My goodness.
Pharrell Williams.
Pharrell Williams, Queen Latifah. We've got Don Cheadle. We've got Kevin Spacey.
And this is November 8th.
This is November 8th and 9th.
Okay. You run the estate.
Yes.
What does your job entail?
Well, you know, I often tell people I wear 3 hats. You know, I wear this chairman hat for the Monk Institute, and that's a truly educational endeavor. I wear the T.S. Monk hat for my fans because I'm T.S. Monk as a performing artist. And then I wear the Thelonious Monk Jr. hat, although I'm not really Thelonious Monk Jr. The guy that everyone absolutely adores is actually Thelonious Monk Jr. I'm actually Thelonious Monk III. I've got a 6'4", 6'5" son that's Thelonious Monk IV. But so I have these 3 hats, and the Thelonious Monk Jr. hat, for lack of a better term.
But you don't correct it, though.
Yeah, I do. But a lot of people just, you know how people are. They just don't say,
I said it.
I am his son. So the natural inclination is Junior.
Okay.
But Thelonious never prescribed to the Junior.
He just never used it?
He just never used it.
Yeah.
In the role as Thelonious Monk Jr., I control 90% of his music, and everything keys off the music. So everything Thelonious essentially comes to me. Thelonious was extraordinary, along with my mother Nellie, in that in 1961, I believe it was 1961 or 1962, Thelonious took his music, all that he owned and all that he subsequently wrote after those years, and put it in a publishing company, and he put the publishing company itself in me and my sister's name, because he wanted to avoid probate court. He didn't want there to be any question as to who owned the music.
Right.
So by the time I was 15 years old, I owned the music. you know, and that has afforded me the opportunity to really interact and really engage the recording industry, because unfortunately, most of the children of the jazz giants we love, the Miles Davises and the Charlie Parkers and the Charles Mingus's, and the list goes on and on. Most of them, the families do not have control of the music, and consequently, they don't have control of the legacy.
You played for 2 years as a drummer for your father's...
5.
5 years.
5
okay,
years.
I read 2, but you would know better. What was it like to play with him, and was he harder on you because you were his son?
You know what? He wasn't harder on me, but that generation was hard on everyone. And as a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to talk with Ben Riley, to talk with Max Roach, to talk with Roy Haynes, to talk with a number of the drummers that were with Thelonious in his heyday, because I wanted to know if there was any difference in my experience from their experience. And so I would say to them things like, well, you know, the very first gig, I didn't know what we were going to play. And they said, very first gig, I didn't know what we were going to play. And Thelonious, I mean, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that Thelonious didn't make any particular accommodation for me. Either I was up to the task,
right,
or I wasn't. Now, as to playing with Thelonious Monk, all I can say to your viewers is it's like this. Playing with Thelonious Monk is like playing with Miles Davis, is like playing with John Coltrane, is like playing with Duke Ellington, is like playing... Those people are profound, and when you perform with them, it's like being on a magic carpet, because you've been allowed to sit on the carpet with them, and you go on this ride, and it's fantastic. And when you step off the carpet back into the real world, you realize where you have actually been. Once I stopped playing with my father, I continued to play his music like the rest of the jazz community. Mm-hmm. What I found was that playing his music, minus him, was a completely different experience than playing the music with him. Mm-hmm. And all I can say is that playing with Monk was magical. If you talk to a Herbie Hancock or a Ron Carter, they'll tell you playing with Miles was magical. If you talk to a McCoy Tyner, he will tell you playing with Coltrane was absolutely magical.
And you knew Miles and Coltrane.
I knew Miles and Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Horace Silver, Sonny Rollins, Johnny Griffin. The list goes on and on.
Was Miles nice to you as a kid?
Let me tell you about Miles Davis.
He wasn't always the nicest guy.
Let me tell you about Miles Davis from my perspective. See, everything is relative. Today, most people think that Miles and Thelonious were peers. They were not peers, not at all. There was a good 7 or 8, almost 10 years between them. And you know, if you're 22 and you're talking to a 30-year-old, he's your senior,
he's
big
your
time.
elder,
He's your elder, big time. And that was the situation. So Miles Davis used to come to the door, and he used to knock on the door. I was the official door answerer. I was a little guy. This was when I was maybe 6, 7 years old. And I would open the door, and he'd say, tell Monk Miles is here, right? So then I'd go into the room. My father would be laying on the bed with his hand over his head, right? And I'd say, Daddy, Miles says he's here, right? And he would say, let him in. Now, it varied as to what would happen once Miles came in. But Miles was like a mouse. He was like a mouse around Thelonious. And sometimes he would sit down at the piano, and Thelonious would get right up, and they'd get into it. They'd start showing him the inside changes around midnight or some composition. But other times, Miles would come in and sit on that piano, and my father would be in the room 10 feet away with his hand over his head like this, laying on the bed, and he might lay like that for an hour and a half. And you know what Miles Davis did?
What?
He sat there, he sat on that piano with his horn next to him and waited for Monk to get up to show him the stuff, because Thelonious was like the root source preacher man for that whole generation. And I saw when I was a kid that metaphorically, Thelonious there was like this universe that ran around him. All these cats were part of this universe that seemed to revolve around Daddy, but I noticed that each one of these guys, it was like a galaxy, because each one of these guys, they had their own little universe around them. And I saw that they all seemed to hold Thelonious in the highest regard. And now I know that that was because he was the composer. He was the guy that, you know, often people call Thelonious the high priest of bebop. Thelonious was the father of modern jazz. And the reason I say that is because if you understand that bebop was a transitional period, right? It was very brief. It was only from about 1942 to about 1951, maybe 8 years, 9 years, right? And then it was about modern jazz. And bebop compositions were generally based on standard repertoire. You dig? So you had a standard chord progression, and then the likes of Dizzy and Bird and Miles and those guys, they came up with all these fantastic new melodic and rhythmic innovations to go on top of this standard repertoire. But what Thelonious brought to the table was the new harmonics, the new structures in order to improvise on. You dig? And that's why everybody was running. That's why everybody wanted to play Straight No Chase, and everybody wanted to play Trinkle Tinkle, and everybody wanted to play Round Midnight. If you actually look at Thelonious's compositions, I think he has 2 bebop tunes. But Crevasseur with Nelly is no bebop. You know, Round Midnight is no bebop. You know, Epistrophe is no bebop. That's modern jazz. Epistrophe sent John Coltrane off into his own modal thing. You dig what I'm saying? And most importantly, what Thelonious did for the generation of younger musicians around him was that he gave them courage. He gave them the courage to push the envelope, you see? And that's what the music is really all about. Jazz is about pushing the envelope, but somebody has to lead. In the 1920s, Duke led as the composer that brought us out of honky-tonk and out of ragtime and all of that, and brought a whole new look to this intellectual endeavor called jazz. And so the next big movement for the music itself was really in the early 1950s. And in the early 1950s, what do you get? You get Miles Davis getting away from Charlie Parker, and all of a sudden it's with Jerry Mulligan, and they're doing Birth of the Cool. And Miles now represents cool, you know? And if you listen to Thelonious Monk with Charlie Christian circa 1945, and then you listen to Thelonious Monk 1965 with Charlie Rouse, man, that's like night and day. So the developmental process was going on and on and on, and nobody really understood it, because you have to remember bebop was somewhat like hip hop in its lack of acceptance, in the effort that was made by the establishment within jazz itself to say, we don't know what these young guys are doing, but it ain't happening. It ain't happening at all. Although none of the older guys would really do that. They wouldn't buy into that, because Thelonious was one of Duke's proteges. Thelonious came up under Duke Ellington, Jelly Roll Morton, Willie the Lion Smith, and Art Tatum. And when he showed up, they said he was not of the tradition. How ridiculous was that?
Very ridiculous, considering what we have coming up here November.
You dig?
Unbelievable. Thank you very much, Thelonious Monk III. I appreciate you so much. More to talk about, and I want you to come back, because
my pleasure.
Some great storytelling.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with Thelonious Monk III, I'm Lee Hawkins. We'll see you next time.